Think back to an instance where you were so immersed in what you were doing that you forgot all about time, what else was happening around you, where you needed to be. That's flow. My name is Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome to Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. Today, I look forward to speaking with David Melnikoff. David is an assistant professor of organizational behavior at Stanford GSB. He investigates how people pursue and achieve their goals, especially with a focus on flow. Welcome, David. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
In my early studies in managing anxiety around public speaking, I learned about the concept of flow. You've looked deeply into flow. I'm wondering, though, for our listeners who might not be familiar with it, can you share a bit about what flow is and what the benefits of flow are?
Sure. Flow is the state of being completely immersed and engaged in what you're doing. So normally when we pursue a goal, we imagine something that's tedious, tiresome. It requires effort. It requires self-control. It requires grit. Basically, you have to keep your foot on the gas to keep going. And to fail at goal pursuit is to fail to keep your foot on the gas. But when you're in a flow state, this dynamic is reversed. You don't need to exert effort and self-control to keep going. You need to exert effort and self-control to stop yourself. So if you've ever seen a child, or if you yourself have ever been playing a video game and someone comes in and says, "Can you stop? We need to go do something else." And you say, "Sure." And then 45 minutes later, you're still doing what you're doing. That was a flow state. The benefits of flow are many. When you're in a flow state, you tend to perform better at the task that you're currently engaged in. And also, flow has benefits for mental health and well-being. The more flow people experience, the happier they tend to be in their daily lives.
I certainly remember when I was studying anxiety management around communication, that getting into that present moment, being in the flow of it, reduced the feelings of anxiety and actually increased enjoyment.
Right.
When you mentioned video gaming, I had to smile. I had a very unhealthy relationship with Tetris for a while.
Yes, Tetris is the classic example of a flow-inducing activity.
Yeah, I would get in the flow and lose total track of time. So how can one get into a state of flow, and are there different strategies for maintaining a state of flow?
One of the main findings of my research is that the typical advice that you get about how to achieve flow seems to be wrong. So typically, when people advise you on how to enter a flow state, they say that what you need is an optimal level of challenge in the task you're pursuing. So you want a task that's not so difficult as to be frustrating, but you also want a task that's not so easy as to be boring. My work suggests that that's not true. And we don't really need to get into the details of the work. We can just see that this is not true if you walk into any casino and go look at the people playing slot machines. There's nothing easier and less challenging in the world than putting a quarter in a slot and pulling a lever. But a slot machine is one of the most potent sources of flow there is. People will be in an almost trance-like state, engaging in this activity that is nowhere near any sort of Goldilocks zone of challenge. So if it's not a moderate level of challenge, what is the source of flow? The source of flow, according to my research, is the engaging in an activity that allows you to reduce uncertainty about your future. Engaging in actions that reduce possible future outcomes, or ideally eliminate all possible future outcomes except for one. The elimination of possible futures induces a state of flow. So concretely, returning to the case of a slot machine, before you pull a lever on that slot machine, there are dozens and dozens of possible outcomes, specifically financial payouts. And you're highly uncertain about which of those outcomes will be realized. Then you pull the lever, and then those symbols appear on the reel, and all of that uncertainty is suddenly eliminated. You've reduced many, many, many possible futures to one. And that hit of uncertainty reduction draws you in, sucks you in, and captures your attention and induces a state of flow. And what's sort of magical about the slot machine is you can do it right over again as many times as you want, and you'll get that same hit of uncertainty reduction again and again and again. It's that hit of uncertainty reduction that cultivates a flow state.
It's fascinating. Several things you said just really intrigue me. I like this notion of cultivating. I like that word. It sounds like something you work on, you tend to. You teach organizational behavior. You're in a business school. How do these principles you've just described apply directly in business, in running meetings or in our interactions with others, the goals that we set for our function, our role, the way in which we create our strategy? How do these all come together?
I think that it invites you to think about the amount of when you give someone a task, when you give someone a goal, and you frame a goal for that person, it invites you to think about the amount of uncertainty associated with the goal you've assigned. So, as off the top of my head, suppose you are thinking of creating a sales competition. There are many ways of framing the sales competition as an incentive. You can say the winner of the sales competition, say there are 50 salespeople, and you say the winner of this competition is going to win a ticket for an all-expense paid vacation. Now, there's only one winner here. You can either win or lose. And probably when you have 49 competitors, the likelihood of winning is not very high. So you sort of already know the outcome. There's not much uncertainty for you to reduce by actually engaging in this sales competition. You could have alternatively had various prizes, a first place, second place, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and maybe if funds are limited, it's not an all-expense paid trip for everyone. But in this case, if the relevant outcome is not just win-lose, but come in first, come in second, come in third, come in fourth, now there's a lot more uncertainty available for the competitors to reduce through the competition, and that will induce more flow. And we already talked about the benefits of that result in greater performance.
I find it interesting and counterintuitive. Often when managers are trained and leaders are trained, it's all about reducing uncertainty to make things clearer and help prioritize. And here I'm hearing that we can actually leverage uncertainty to be beneficial.
There's a misunderstanding that uncertainty is inherently bad.
Right.
And it's easy to fall into that trap because remember, flow emerges from the reduction of uncertainty. So ultimately, you do want to reduce the uncertainty, but there must be uncertainty there to be reduced in the first place. So we shouldn't interpret the value of reducing uncertainty as meaning that we should eliminate certainty to begin with. You want to give people opportunities to reduce uncertainty because that is where flow comes from.
On this podcast, we've talked to your colleague Suchi Huang, and we've talked to Katie Milkman about goals and goal pursuit, particularly for individuals. This seems to me to be yet another tool that we can use in our own pursuit of the goals we have: fitness, health, well-being, being social. Do you yourself use some of these tools to help you engage in more meaningful goal pursuit?
Yeah, I certainly do. I try to set goals for myself that are the outcomes of which are as uncertain as possible so that I can reduce as much uncertainty as possible through my actions. This can take a variety of forms. So a lot of what I do is write. And writing is as important as it can be a real slog for a lot of people, myself included. And what I like to do is ask myself, what way of framing this writing activity would induce as much uncertainty as possible? Is it how many words can I write in the next 30 minutes? Is it how many paragraphs can I complete in the next hour? Is it how good of an introduction to this paper can I write? Now the outcome isn't number, but some abstract notion of quality. And you can go through all these different ways of framing what you're doing. And for each framing, just ask yourself, how uncertain am I about the outcome of my goal if I adopt this framing or that framing, and pick the one that induces the most uncertainty. And I do that constantly.
I need to do this to help me in my writing, because writing for me
I
can
see,
be
yeah.
very challenging. But I'm also thinking about a personal goal I have to work on my balance and stability. As I get older, that's a more important thing. And immediately I'm starting to think about, I want to look for streaks. How long can
Yes.
I go balancing?
Yes.
How many ways can I do this, achieve this one task? I like that a lot. I can already. I'm excited to do it versus the way I was previously framing it.
To offer another piece of concrete advice,
Sure.
streaks, if we think about it, are really potent sources of flow when the activity that we're talking about is something that you're already quite good at. If you're Steph Curry and you're making 95% of your free throws, if you think in terms of a streak, the length of that streak is really uncertain. I mean, that streak could go on for a really long time. But if you're me,
Yeah.
and I might make, I have no idea, maybe 10%, that streak isn't going to go on more than 2. I mean, there's just no way I'm making 3 in a row. Certainly no way I'm making 4 in a row. Okay, so I sort of know before I start how long that streak is going to go. So for Steph Curry, streaks are going to be far more potent than me. So what should I do? What I should do is not think in terms of how many can I get in a row. What I should do is think, what are the fewest number of misses I can achieve before my first success? Because that number is highly uncertain, much more uncertain than how many successes can I get in a row. So when you're great at something, streaks are good. When you're not so good at something, think, what's the fewest number of misses before my first success?
I really like that. And that is, it's motivational, and it's something that I think all of us can do in many different aspects of our lives. Thank you. Some of my most flow-like experiences happen when I'm with others in conversation, playing a sport, interacting in some way. Is there research on how we can best collaborate with others to create shared flow experience? And on what role does communication play in that, if any?
Sure. So in any communicative context, there is some goal and there's some uncertainty associated with that, and you can reduce that uncertainty through communication. And the degree to which the communication reduces that uncertainty will lead to more or less flow in that conversation. So, for instance, suppose I'm an employee and you're a manager, and I come to you in search of feedback on a job that I did. I want to know how well I did on a particular task or how well I'm doing at my job in general. Depending on how you respond and how I expect you to respond, you can reduce more or less uncertainty about my performance. The more uncertainty you reduce, the more flow I'm going to experience during that conversation. So for you, that means a few things. One, it means that your feedback needs to be trustworthy. And in general, trustworthiness is going to be really important for flow in communication, because if I can't trust what you're saying, then what you're saying cannot possibly reduce very much uncertainty for me. Second, you need to be clear. That's kind of obvious. If you're unclear, I don't know what the heck you're saying, then of course what you're saying can't reduce very much uncertainty for me. And third, you need to be sufficiently specific. So maybe you're a manager who is the kind of person who will give me 1 or 2 responses to the question, how am I doing? You might say, you are meeting or exceeding expectations, or you are not meeting or exceeding expectations. Now, if I'm a decent employee, I already knew that I was meeting or exceeding expectations. You've not reduced any uncertainty for me. For me to get information, what I need is something specific. I need to know, well, am I meeting or am I exceeding? If I'm exceeding, by how much am I exceeding? And in what way am I exceeding? So you need to be trustworthy, clear, and specific in order for communication to be a source of flow.
Excellent. When I was in graduate school, I studied uncertainty reduction theory in communication, and it's exactly as you're talking about. You know, most communication that we feel most intensely about and can get in those flow states is where we are reducing uncertainty for each other. So mutual disclosure and really working towards that. Really, really fascinating. This is a total tangential curiosity I have. How do you do? What's the distinction in your mind between ambiguity and uncertainty? Because in communication in particular, we some of our most important goals we achieve through ambiguity, where we're purposely trying to be unclear. How does that relate to this notion of uncertainty? Because when I'm ambiguous, I'm certainly increasing uncertainty. Just as a professional curiosity, do you make a distinction?
So I would say to be ambiguous is just to be a source of uncertainty for others in conversation. I think that there can be an art to being ambiguous and seeming specific.
Right.
Sometimes people can go away thinking they've learned a lot, and then when you actually look back and recall what they said, you realize that could have meant anything. Right. And so it is. So in that sense, it is, I think, possible to reduce uncertainty in the mind of another while in fact being ambiguous. But I do think that generally speaking, they're going to be very closely linked in the sense that the more ambiguous you are, the more uncertainty there's going to be in among the members of your audience.
And that resonates. You know, often when we teach communication, we focus on fidelity, accuracy, and clarity, reducing uncertainty. And yet many of the things we do in our lives, deception, relationship initiation, politeness, we invoke uncertainty and ambiguity to help us get through it.
That's right.
So we've talked about the role of flow in goal setting and goal attainment. You study goals in general. Besides flow, do you have other advice or recommendations for how we can set goals we can achieve and work towards accomplishing them?
Well, I think the most novel advice that I can offer is actually something that we touched on earlier, which is that I think the way you phrased it, you said, how can we set achievable goals?
Yes.
And that's a very common question, and most people want to set goals that are as attainable as possible. And that's not bad advice. You certainly don't want to set a goal that you know you can't obtain. But you also don't want to set a goal that's too attainable. And I think people can get off track by setting goals that are so easy, so attainable, that there's no uncertainty about whether to what extent it will be achieved. So whether you have a weight loss goal or a professional goal or any kind of academic goal or health goal, I would say don't worry. I would say attainability shouldn't be the strongest or most salient focus. You want to find some sweet spot where there's some degree of uncertainty about whether to what extent you're going to achieve it. Now, of course, when doing this, you need to account for the cost of failing to achieve. But given that, you really want to have the attainability of the goal be as uncertain as possible, given the cost of failure.
I think that's very helpful. I know in my own life and the people I'm close to, setting goals are things that we think we can achieve right away and are very clearly defined. And maybe the best step is to go one beyond that and see, to build in that uncertainty.
That's right.
I want to get meta a bit. You study a very complex topic, flow. You talk about certainty and uncertainty in ways that most people don't think about them. What techniques and tactics do you use as you think about explaining complex concepts like this that others could benefit from? Because you do a very nice job of helping. You use analogies, you use examples. What's your thought process on how do I take something that's complex and make it accessible so people can understand it?
I think it's a combination of two things. One, it just so happens to be the case that a lot of complicated concepts don't come easy to me. It requires a lot of work, and I start off confused and frustrated, and then there's some aha moment. And what I try my very best to do is remember exactly what happened in my mind before that aha moment. Like what was the thing that made it click? It's actually pretty easy to get so caught up in the eureka moment and then forget what it was that got you there. And then when you go back and start trying to explain something, your audience is just as confused as you were when you started.
I really like this idea of the unlock coming from the moment before it all made sense.
Yes.
And reminding yourself what you went through to get there and using that as a catapult to help you explain it to other people. we're often so happy that we just figured it out that we don't remind ourselves what happened right before.
That's right.
And that I think could be a huge unlock for many people. So thank you for that. Before we end, I'd like to ask you 3 questions. One I'll tailor specifically to you, and then the other 2 are questions I ask everybody on this show. Are you ready for that?
I think so.
All right. I'm very curious, David. What is something you do to invite flow into your own life? I sometimes will actually, and I've always, ever since I was a little kid, I loved putting Lego bricks together, and I will use that as a way of getting into a flow state, and for me that works very well. What are things that you do?
So this is don't tell my dean about this, but what I actually do in my office pretty frequently is and actually before I even tell you what I do, let me explain why I do this, because flow increases performance and makes you happier. But sometimes people will engage in a flow activity like Legos as a distraction. And I think that's because when you're doing a creative task, so for me, when I'm writing, sometimes I'm just stuck and I need a reset. I'm just in a mental rut, and I need to leave that mental state I'm in and just come back fresh to the problem that I'm trying to solve. And entering into a flow state for 5 or 10 minutes is a great way of sort of wiping the board clean, and it allows me to come back mentally fresh to the problem that I was trying to solve. And oftentimes it's easier to find a breakthrough that way. So how do I do that? In my office, there's a recycling bin and I have a bunch of markers that I use to write on my whiteboard. And when no one's in my office, I'll take that recycling bin out and I'll toss my markers into the recycling bin, trying to get as many in a row as possible. I've actually become kind of good at this, so I think in terms of streaks and not how many misses, what are the fewest number of misses I can get before my first success. And I'll just do that for a while and then take the markers out of the bin, put the bin back, and go back to my writing.
So I've learned a couple things from that.
Yes.
One, I always have to knock on your door before I come in. I don't want to get hit by an errant pen.
That's right.
And second, for your birthday or for a holiday gift, I'm going to get you little basketballs instead.
I would genuinely love that. Yes.
Yes. So question number 2. Who is a communicator that you admire and why?
I would say Laurie Santos. I know Laurie. So Laurie is a professor of psychology at Yale. She's also the host of, I believe it's the Happiness Lab podcast, which is fabulous. I know her I got my PhD at Yale in the psychology department, and so I've known her for a long time. And what's just always impressed me is her ability to, I mentioned trustworthiness as being a key to flow in conversation. It's obviously just something that's inherently important in communication. And it's, I think, really hard for someone whose job it is to constantly communicate to the public to always make sure that information is accurate. I think that there are some incentives in place that can lead people to maybe say things that don't have all the evidence in the world to support it and say it anyway. And I could just say Laurie, in addition to being crystal clear in the way she communicates and compelling in the way she communicates as a scientific communicator, she's exceptionally trustworthy, and I really admire that.
Excellent. Final question, and trustworthiness might be a component of that answer, is what are the first 3 ingredients that go into a successful communication recipe?
Yes, I think you guessed it. I think for me, trustworthiness, clarity, and, as I said, specificity. I think those are just absolutely essential in order for communication to be successful.
Well, you have done a fantastic job today being very clear, being very specific, and I certainly trust you. and we appreciate the insight, and I encourage everybody to think about how you can build flow into your practice to help you better achieve the goals that you hold for yourself. David, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. To learn more about goals and goal attainment, listen to episode 57 with Suchi Huang and episode 104 with Katie Milkman. This episode was recorded at Stanford Video, produced by Jenny Luna, Ryan Campos, and me, Matt Abrahams. Please find us wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to check out YouTube as well. Follow, like, and support us on Instagram and LinkedIn.